Hello and welcome to Analog Insights. In today's episode, Jules and I review the Olympus OM-3, a 35mm single lens reflex camera with an entirely mechanical shutter, a pretty advanced multi-spot metering system, but no auto exposure mode. The OM-3 was introduced together with the OM-4 at PMA Las Vegas in March 1983 and only became available in the summer of 1984. Interestingly, both cameras came with a redesigned body and the multi-spot metering system and were pretty advanced when it comes to that, but the OM-3 was still sold simultaneously to its predecessor, the OM-1N, which also came with an entirely mechanical shutter but less advanced metering system. And as a result of that, many people opted to go for the earlier model, and Olympus was forced to discontinue the OM-3 after a fairly limited production run of only 3 years, so already in 1986. And as a result of that, this camera is pretty rare until today, and especially in great condition, it can be considered a true collector piece and is heavily sought after by Olympus aficionados and fans and many collectors. So as a result of that, it is often 3 times more expensive than the OM-4, which is arguably more advanced, technically speaking. It comes with an electronically controlled shutter. It comes with auto exposure modes and even TDL metering, all features that the OM-3 does not have, and yet the OM-3 is significantly more expensive. One of our long-term viewers and supporters of the channel sent this camera over to us for review, and of course we were super excited about the opportunity to test it, and at the same time we're very careful with it and has a lot of respect using such an important collector piece for review. So we handled it with particular care this time, and took it out to the Reisting Earth Station that we had visited before for one of our one-shot episodes. If you haven't seen that one, we can highly recommend taking a look at it. And then also went to the so-called Osterseen to shoot some landscape and nature, and also took it out in and around Munich for some architecture and street shots. We shot some Ilford Delta 100, Ilfo Color 400 and Portra 160, and in the case of the Delta 100 we developed it ourselves in the 76. Yeah, we can't wait to share the results with you and share our findings, so let's take a closer look at the features, the handling and our personal impressions. The Olympus OM-3 and OM-4 come with upgraded bodies in comparison to the earlier OM-1 and OM-2. Most importantly, they also come with a very advanced multi-spot metering system in addition to the center-weighted metering from the past. This lets you take up to 8 spot readings in your scene, and then the camera calculates the correct exposure for that scene. What I also like is that it comes with a highlight and shadow button, which let you communicate to the camera where do you have a shadow in your scene that you actually want to be black in the final image, and where do you have a highlight in your scene that you actually want to turn out white. And if you think of a typical center-weighted meter that is looking for a mid-gray in the image and also expects you to meter for mid-gray, you would have problems when looking at a scene that is very bright or very dark, and then you would typically use exposure compensation and the exposure compensation dial to communicate to the camera that this is actually supposed to turn out dark or white. And this highlight and shadow button does away with that, and you can simply use it to communicate that to the camera, and then you're good to go. In the viewfinder, you have an LCD at the bottom of the screen that shows you the correct exposure, which is very nice, and the entire metering system runs with 2 LR44 batteries. And this is interesting because in a similar vein to the Olympus OM-1, the batteries are only needed to run the metering system and the light meter, and not to run the camera itself. So since it comes with a mechanically controlled shutter, the OM-3 works perfectly fine without a battery. Unlike its sister camera, the OM-4, which has an electronically controlled shutter, auto exposure modes, and so on, and needs that for it to work. The OM-3 only was available in black and also comes with a flash hot shoe that supports working with flash, but it doesn't have a TDL automation system and no self-timer. So in that sense, it's a pretty capable but still limited camera. It focuses really on that multi-spot metering system and a mechanical shutter, and this is the focus: no self-timer, no TDL automation, and no auto exposure modes. What is also interesting is that in 1984, Olympus launched the so-called OM-2 SP, so spot program that Jules happens to have here, which came basically with the features of an OM-2 in the body of the OM-3 and the more advanced body, so to speak, and some improvements. And we perceive this camera a little bit like an interim step between the OM-2 and the OM-3, kind of bridging the eras and the gaps here. And since we happen to have it here, we wanted to briefly mention that as well. Speaking of editions and versions of the camera, there was in 1995 the release of the Olympus OM-3 Ti, so a titanium version of the camera that came with various improvements and is arguably the most expensive OM camera in the entire lineup. It's super expensive and more of a prestige object, so many people wouldn't buy it for the photographic capabilities, but more for, okay, this is an important and rare one. And despite the fact that it was built between 1995 all the way up until 2002, it is still relatively rare and very hard to get in a great condition. So the OM-3 is already rare and hard to get because of the limited production run, but the most expensive one in the lineup would be the OM-3 Ti, the titanium version. So what about the lenses and accessories? The Olympus OM-3 lets you tap into the entire OM system. It comes with outstanding lenses that are very compact, well made, and perform optically. And what I particularly like about the system is that you typically have for the core focal length kind of a widest open aperture benchmark lens, and also more moderate versions available that don't break the bank. And that lets you configure a really nice lineup, in my opinion, where you could focus on really nice f1.4 or f2 lenses for the kind of focal length that you use all the time, and then maybe add something to your collection with a focal length that you rarely use and where you don't want to spend so much money, and yet you don't have to compromise on the build quality, unlike other manufacturers where you sometimes really feel like, oh, the f2.4 or something is significantly worse than the f2 version. And this is what I really like about the OM system. In our case, we used a wide array of different lenses, so the 21mm f3.5, the 24mm f2, the 35mm f2, the 50mm f1.4, the 100mm f2.8, the 135mm f2.8, and the 300mm f4.5. In terms of accessories, there are two different motor drives available, which both allow for shooting up to 5 frames per second, and the second one also comes with an automatic film rewind. And furthermore, there are two different winders available, winder 1 and 2, with the first one only supporting single shots and the second one shooting 2.5 frames per second continuously. The system also offers a data bag, which lets you put the date, time and exposure data onto the final frame, and magazines for shooting up to 250 exposures. The OM-3 is also compatible with 16 different focusing screens in the OM system and various flashes thanks to its built-in hot shoe. As a result, the OM-3 can be used for all sorts of photographic applications. Personally, I could really see myself using it, especially for shooting portraits, ideally with a winder or even a motor drive. And also, thanks to its compact form factor of both the camera and the lenses, I can see myself using it with just one lens for street shots, like a 50mm or 35mm. This also works really nice. And what I found important to point out is that it can also be used for landscape. And it's not necessarily the camera that comes to mind if you think of shooting landscapes. And here in this case, of course, the advanced metering system is great, because if you imagine you have a complex scene, maybe in the morning light with a lot of different spots in the frame that you want to make sure that they are being exposed correctly, you can make use of that up to 8 spots of reading in that scene, and then get a really nice exposure at the end. So it's ideal for such complex lighting situations or shooting landscapes, and it's not necessarily associated with that. So overall, a really interesting and versatile OM system, of course, that you can also benefit from when using the Olympus OM-3. So what about the handling and our personal impressions? The camera looks and feels fantastic, and I could immediately understand why it is such a coveted collector piece. The white font on the black body looks really premium and sleek. The button configuration makes a lot of sense and just feels easy to use. Of course, as always with such an advanced metering system, it takes a little bit of time of getting your hang around it and getting to understand it. But once you do, it's actually a lot of fun to use it. And we just really enjoyed it. What we also particularly liked is the LCD in the viewfinder and how responsive it is when you turn the aperture or shutter speed dials. And we were both reminded with these liquid elements moving up and down of the Knight Rider's kit, and had immediately these 1980s vibes from our childhood of seeing that and seeing that responsive LCD. This was really nice. The mechanical shutter sounds beautiful, arguably not as wonderful as the mechanical shutter on the Nikon FM2 or the Canon new F1 that we just recently reviewed, and yet it sounds really nice and reliable. And if you remember our OM-1 review from years ago, we highlighted how nice it is that you actually have this on-off switch and can simply decide whether you want to use the camera with the light meter or turned off. And this feature unfortunately got lost for the OM-3, probably in part because it has to share the same button layout and body design with the electronically controlled OM-4, where such an on-off switch wouldn't really make sense. And the only way to really turn off the light meter in the case of the OM-3 is by turning it to the bulb mode or taking out the batteries. And this is something that is often highlighted in the community, that these cameras are a battery drain and so on. So turn it to the bulb mode to make sure your light meter is being not used and the battery is being saved. This is the only downside, a minor complaint I would say. It would be nice to just have this old on-off switch to really make use of that feeling of enhancing the shooting experience, or just turning it off and leaving it out. Then there is the part of owning a collector piece and using it for actual photography, and we've touched on that topic before. Personally, in my opinion, the Olympus OM-3 is not too expensive to justify shooting it and using it for actual photography. And yet in the lineup of the OM system, it is arguably pretty expensive. And one could say, if you just want to have a really nice OM camera with a mechanical shutter, why not go for the OM-1 or OM-1N and make do with a center-weighted light meter? Or if you are really fond of the multi-spot metering system and need such an advanced metering system for your photography, then why not go all in and just get a less expensive OM-4 with electronically controlled shutter, an auto exposure mode, TDL, flash automation, and so on. Yeah, you could argue that, and yet I feel like there is a place for this particular camera. There is an audience for that, so to speak. People who appreciate a mechanical shutter that is pretty fast with 1/2000th of a second, and who appreciate the advanced metering system that you can use as an add-on, and that you can use a camera that you can also use without batteries, and people who appreciate the 1980s vibes of that LCD display, as we did, that we felt really enhances the shooting experience. So there is an audience sitting in between there, and I can understand both fields. People arguing this is a fantastic camera and I'm willing to purchase it even for these collector prices. And then I can also understand people who would just say, just go for the OM-1 or the OM-4 instead, and be reasonable and don't spend so much money on it. Personally, I would count me in that camp of OM-3 appreciators who can see how nice it is to have such a reduced camera, no self-timer, no bells and whistles that are unnecessary, and just a really nice, well-performing mechanical shutter and a really reliable, nice metering system if I need it. So it really comes down to your personal preferences, but the OM-3 has a place in our opinion. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Analog Insights and our review of the Olympus OM-3. A remarkable collector piece from the 1980s with a really nice mechanical shutter and advanced metering system that certainly has its place in the Olympus lineup. If you liked this video, please remember to like it and maybe even share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Jules, Greg, and I really appreciate each and every subscriber coming our way. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.